What if your last breath wasn't filled with fear, but with hope? What if, as the world waited for your death, you asked not for mercy, not for food, not even for a final word, but for a vision of the Virgin Mary? That was the last wish of a man the world had already forgotten. And what happened next would shake a prison, a city, and every person who thought miracles no longer belonged to our time. This is the story of Michael Carter. Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. Michael Carter had been called many names: murderer, sinner, lost cause. But to one woman, his mother, Maria, he was still her son. The same child she once carried to morning mass, whispering Ave Maria as sunlight fell through the church windows. Faith had always lived in Maria's house. A small altar stood near the kitchen, a candle, a rosary, and a porcelain statue of Our Lady of Sorrows. If you ever lose your way, she used to tell her son, look for her eyes, she will find you first. But life, cruel as it often is, found Michael before grace did. His father left when he was 16. Michael stopped going to church, traded his hymns for bar fights, and drowned his guilt in liquor. Then came the night that changed everything. It was raining, the kind of merciless southern rain that washes away the footprints of truth. A gunshot cracked the air outside a convenience store on St. Francis Street. When the police arrived, only Michael was there, and the gun was still warm in his trembling hands. They called it justice. Maria called it a mistake, but the court called it murder. At the sentencing, the judge read the verdict without looking up. The crowd watched in silence as Michael whispered, "If you truly exist, have mercy on me before it's too late." He was 22 when he entered Holman Correctional Facility, a place the guards themselves feared. His cell was small, his hope smaller. For years he lived without speaking to anyone but his mother, who never missed a single visit. Every Wednesday at 3 in the afternoon, she'd appear behind the glass, silver hair tucked under a scarf, rosary clutched like armor. "She hasn't forgotten you, Michael," she'd say softly. "The Mother of God is with you, even here." He wanted to believe her, but how could he? The Virgin in her prayers seemed too far from the rusted iron of Holman. Yet Maria never gave up. She left small folded notes in her letters, prayers copied in her shaky handwriting. Hail Mary, full of grace. Then, one night, the sound of the prison gates echoed down the corridor like a funeral bell. Sleep wouldn't come. Michael stared at the framed picture of the Virgin Mary that his mother had sent him. For reasons he couldn't explain, he whispered the first words that came to his lips. Hail Mary, full of grace. It felt strange, foreign, like rediscovering a language he once knew as a child. But he kept going, word after word, bead after bead. The rhythm calmed his shaking hands. It was the first time in 10 years that the rosary moved through his fingers again. From that night on, something changed. The guards noticed he stopped swearing. The chaplain said he saw Michael praying alone at dawn. The air in his cell seemed lighter, as though the walls themselves were beginning to breathe again. Then, one night, as the moon rose over the razor wire fence, Michael woke to a blinding light streaming through the cracks of his concrete cell. It wasn't the cold fluorescence of prison bulbs. It was warm, golden, alive. He heard footsteps, soft as silk. A scent of roses filled the air. He turned, and there she was, the Virgin Mary. Not in a dream, not as an illusion, but standing before him, radiant, sorrowful, real. Her gaze met his, and every sin he had ever committed fell silent. That was the night Holman Prison witnessed something the world could not explain.
The light didn't blind him. It cradled him, like a child returned to the womb of mercy. Michael collapsed to his knees, ribs trembling as if his heart sought escape through his chest. The air quivered, not with brightness, but with a quiet radiance, like the first shimmer before dawn. She stood there, her veil woven from the threads of moonlight, her eyes carrying the sorrow of every Golgotha. "Why me?" His voice cracked like plaster. "Why come here, to someone like me?" Her answer was neither thunder nor sermon. "My son builds no walls against love," she murmured, her breath the scent of lilies brushing his cheek. "Grace seeps through iron as water through stone." He wept, not for what he'd lost, but for the mercy he never thought he'd deserve. The woman's presence filled the space with a stillness that felt eternal, and for a heartbeat, the entire prison seemed to kneel. Then her illuminance began to fold into the dark, as though heaven itself were inhaling her away. A faint nimbus lingered, fragile, trembling, and then it was gone. Michael didn't sleep that night. He sat against the wall, tracing her outline in the air. The scent of lilies clung to him like confession. He told no one. Not yet. Holman was a place that devoured miracles. But something in him changed. The guard saw it first. He stopped cursing. He ate in silence. He looked at others the way men look at sunlight after years underground. When Maria came for her next visit, he didn't speak immediately. He only smiled, his eyes strangely alive. "Mom," he whispered through the glass. "She came." Maria froze, her rosary falling open in her lap. "Who, son?" He looked past her shoulder, as if still seeing the light. Her. The Virgin. For a long time she couldn't breathe. Then she covered her face and sobbed, whispering, "Praise be to God. I told you, Michael. I told you she'd never leave you." Word spread quietly. A guard mentioned a strange glow around cell 13 that night. Another swore he smelled roses where there were none. The prison chaplain, a man of reason, checked the security footage and found a flicker at 3 a.m., the hour of mercy. "A glitch," he muttered, though his hands shook when he said it. Days turned to weeks. The inmates began whispering. One of them, Jerome, a man who had once stabbed his friend over $20, mocked him at first. "You saw a lady in white? Maybe the bleach finally got to your brain." Michael said nothing. He only replied, "When you've been touched by mercy, mockery sounds like an echo." That night, Jerome woke to a scent. Roses, faint and living. Then he saw it, a shimmer moving past the bars, soft as breath, bright as a candle under water. Dawn found him on his knees, begging the chaplain for a rosary he'd mocked the day before. A few days later, Nurse Evelyn, the one who had stopped believing after her husband's suicide, was delivering medication when she heard someone humming an old hymn near Michael's cell. The melody was tender, maternal, but when she looked inside, he was asleep. The next morning, she left a single white rose on the food tray slot. No one could explain it, yet everyone felt it. The prison, built for despair, began to taste faintly of grace. Still, outside Michael's cell, the law waited, patient and cold. His final appeal was denied. The chaplain offered comfort. Michael offered peace. "I'm ready," he said. "I've already seen what waits for me." On his last night, the sky over Holman was clear, a rare mercy. Inside, Michael knelt, bead slipping through fingers steady as a monk's. The picture of the Virgin pulsed faintly against the wall, like a heartbeat. "She's here," he whispered, smiling. The priest entered with trembling hands. The air grew fragrant again, not sweet, but solemn, like incense before an altar. Outside the door, under the pale fluorescence of justice, the syringe gleamed on a steel tray, silent, waiting.
The morning after Michael Carter's execution, Holman Prison did not wake, it waited. Every corridor, every rusted bar, every ceiling vent seemed to hold its breath. The place that had always hummed with metal and rage now felt like a chapel,
after midnight. Jerome was the first to break the silence. A man once feared, whose hands had traded life for $20 and a knife, now spoke in a whisper. He said the light didn't blind him, it inhaled the darkness. It folded into itself, breathing softly through the cracks beneath Michael's door. "I thought it was the generator," he muttered, eyes still haunted. But no light ever made me cry before. When dawn came, Father Alphonse stepped into the execution chamber. He expected the stale scent of bleach and sorrow, but what met him was different. Not roses, as legend would later claim, but the unmistakable trace of myrrh, bitter, sacred, clinging to the leather straps of the gurney. The same scent that had followed the body of Christ to his tomb. He lifted a single rosary bead resting on the steel tray beside the bed. It caught the light, trembling as if still alive. That morning, whispers traveled through the prison like smoke through old vents. But instead of rumors, they carried fragments of prayer. In the mess hall, Big Tom, serving 3 life sentences, passed a crumpled note under the table. "Carter's cell smells like church now. Pass it on." By evening, half the cell block had begun praying the Hail Mary, not because they believed, but because they needed something to hold on to. The guards didn't stop them. Even the warden paused outside Michael's old cell, listening to the rhythm of whispered prayers weaving through the air. He said later, it was like the building was breathing with them. That night, he dreamed of Jasmine, faint and fragile, floating in the prison yard where nothing had grown in 30 years. 3 days later, Maria Carter received her son's ashes. The urn was small, heavy, warm against her palms, but there was something else in the box. A letter, folded twice. It read, "Tell them, Mom. She came." Maria drove to her parish in Montgomery and placed the urn at the feet of the Virgin statue, the same one before which she had prayed when Michael was still a boy. When she touched the marble hand, it felt not cold, but alive. Father Alphonse joined her that evening. "The diocese has opened an investigation," he told her quietly. "They took air samples from the chamber. The results showed nothing. No perfume, no oils, no chemicals." Maria looked up at the statue, eyes glistening. "Then what do they think it was?" He hesitated. "They don't know." The bishop closed the file and said, "Some mysteries are not for labs." Months passed. Catholic forums, radio hosts, and even skeptical journalists began to tell the story. But inside Holman, something deeper had taken root. Jerome now led evening prayers. The man who once carved pain into others now traced each Hail Mary like a wound being mended. Evelyn, the nurse who had turned her back on faith, returned every week to help inmates learn the rosary. She said it wasn't duty, it was penance. The prison changed, not through miracles of stone or light, but through the quiet rhythm of grace repeating itself. Maria's house smelled faintly of roses that no one had brought. She sat each night by her kitchen window, the moon silvering her hands as she prayed. Hail Mary, full of grace. And sometimes, in the ache between one bead and the next, she heard another voice join hers. Not Michael's, hers, the mother's. And in that harmony, grief and glory breathed as one.
The news should have vanished like mist over the prison yard, brief, weightless, forgotten. But what began as whispers behind bars began to seep through the cracks of Holman's walls, into parishes, classrooms, and the restless conscience of a world that had stopped believing in mercy. Maria Carter didn't seek attention. She had buried her son, and with him the small light she thought faith once was. But heaven, as always, has its own timing for resurrection. It happened on a humid afternoon in Montgomery, 6 months after Michael's death. Workers were restoring the old Virgin Mary statue in the parish courtyard, the same one Maria had knelt before the night her son was executed. As they lifted it, a worker gasped. Oil began to form at the statue's eyes. Not water, thick, golden, fragrant. It rolled down the marble cheeks and pooled at the base. Then the men tried to move it again. It wouldn't budge. 200 pounds of marble, immovable. Not by weight, but as if anchoring itself to the prayers once wept upon its feet. Father Alphonse was called. He came running from the rectory, vestments still creased from morning mass. He stopped short when he saw it, the luminous sheen gliding across the statue's surface like moonlight trapped in stone. The parish bells began to ring, though no one had touched the ropes. Word spread, first through Montgomery, then further. By evening, hundreds gathered, families, skeptics, strangers. The air was heavy with the scent of oil and something sweeter, jasmine, faint but insistent, clinging to every breath. Maria arrived near dusk. She fell to her knees before the statue, hands trembling. I prayed she'd never have to cry again, but maybe she's crying for all of us. Cameras recorded everything. The oil continued to flow for hours, sometimes pulsing with light as if from within. The diocese intervened quickly. Within a day, Vatican officials and theologians arrived, among them a priest known for discerning false apparitions, a Vatican exorcist. He examined the statue, collected samples, and prayed in Latin beneath his breath. Then quietly he said to the bishop, "No trace of perfume, no artificial source, not demonic, but not ordinary either." The investigation grew tense. Skeptics accused the parish of emotional manipulation. Scientists suggested chemical condensation, capillary leaks. The faithful responded with rosaries and tears. Father Alphonse refused interviews. He said, "This isn't for cameras, it's for conversion." Weeks later, the footage from the church's security camera was reviewed for the final report. One frame caught something strange. Not a shape, not even a full figure, just a silhouette in striped shadow, kneeling before the statue and gone before the frame could focus. No one spoke his name. They didn't need to. The story, the Montgomery miracle, as it came to be called, spread across continents. In a prison in the Philippines, inmates prayed for Michael's intercession. In Poland, a seminarian wrote, "If grace could find a soul behind iron, it can find me." And in the United States, Catholic radio aired Maria's trembling voice. "It wasn't about saving my son's life. It was about saving his soul and mine." Letters began arriving by the hundreds. Stories of healings, conversions, reconciliations. Among them was one written in crooked, childlike letters. "Tell the bishop I don't ask for parole anymore. Just a rosary. Jerome." The bishop himself visited Maria soon after. They sat beneath the statue, still faintly luminous under candlelight. He said, "Faith is not proven, it is witnessed. And sometimes the witnesses are not the saints, but those who were found in their ruins." Maria smiled through tears. "Then perhaps my son was both." That night the parish held a vigil. The church overflowed. Men in suits, women in veils, even ex-convicts came, escorted by chaplains. Candles flickered like 1,000 whispered prayers. As they sang Ave Maria, something shifted. The air grew warm, fragrant. A trail of roses drifted near the altar, though no flower had been placed there. And in the very back pew, an old woman who had lost her son to a syringe years ago felt a hand rest gently on her shoulder. She turned. No one was there. But for the first time in years, she found herself whispering again, "Hail Mary, full of grace." Because in that moment, mercy was no longer a story. It was alive.
The world eventually moves on from miracles, or so it believes. But some stories do not die. They settle into the cracks of time, breathing through generations like candlelight that refuses to go out. Months after what the press called the Montgomery miracle, the church sent its final report. Maria held the sealed envelope as if it were alive, afraid to open it, afraid not to. When she finally unfolded the parchment, her eyes met a single Latin phrase printed in careful ink: digna credibilitate, worthy of belief. Not declared dogma, not dismissed as myth, simply believed. And in that half-silence of Rome, Maria heard more faith than in 1,000 sermons. The silence spoke louder than any decree. Weeks later, the first pilgrim arrived, a truck driver from Tennessee. Thick hands, tired eyes, parked his rig outside the church and walked barefoot to the statue. He left his keys at the base and whispered, "She drove me home." A month after that, a young man from Lagos knelt in the same place, trembling. In soft Igbo, he prayed, "Mama Mary, you found me in traffic." The priest standing nearby wept, not because he understood the words, but because he understood the love. And so they came, not crowds, not tourists, but souls. Each one carrying something broken, each one leaving lighter than they arrived. The church soon became a quiet lighthouse. The oil had stopped flowing, but the fragrance, faint jasmine and myrrh, still clung to the walls. Scientists found nothing. The Vatican sent another observer, then withdrew him. Faith, they said, needs no microscope. In the prison where it all began, Jerome kept a small wooden cross hidden in his pocket. Sometimes at night, he whispered to the dark, "Tell her I remember." And far away, Maria, lighting her kitchen candle, whispered back, "She knows." Years passed. The world changed, yet the statue remained unmoved. Not stone, but witness. Every evening, as dusk folded over Montgomery, Missouri, the faithful gathered again. A handful of candles, a single hymn, a story retold in hush and trembling hope. Among them was Maria, older now, her rosary worn smoothed by years of prayer. Each bead held a memory of guilt, of grace, of the impossible. When someone asked why she still came every night, she smiled faintly and said, "Because someone once asked to see her before dying, and now I come to see her while living." Imagine the candlelight flickering, small flames mirrored in the marble eyes of the Virgin. The air hums with a quiet that feels alive. And somewhere in that stillness, a voice, not of marble or man, whispers gently, "Faith does not end at reth rows or hospital wards or crumbling churches. It begins there." And every prayer whispered in darkness becomes a star in the kingdom. The night deepens. The last candle trembles, then steadies. And like a river finding its way home to the sea, her grace continues its course.